skill. It's a bit of a comma. I think it says probably a literary or musical term. It covers all eventualities, doesn't it? The psalmist begins with a cry and a question to God. Why have you rejected us forever, O God? Why does your anger smoulder against the sheep of your pasture? Remember the people you purchased of old, the tribe of your inheritance whom you redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwelt. Turn your steps towards these everlasting ruins. All this destruction the enemy has brought on the sanctuary. Your foes roared in the place where you met us. They set up their standards as signs. They behaved like men wielding axes to cut through a thicket of trees. They smashed all the carved panelling with their axes and hatchets. They burned your sanctuary to the ground. They defiled the dwelling place of your name. They said in their hearts, we will crush them completely. They burned every place where God was worshipped in the land. We are given no miraculous signs. No prophets are left, and none of us knows how long this will be. How long will the enemy mock you, O God? Will the foe revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the folds of your garment and destroy them. But you, O God, are my King from of old. You bring salvation upon the earth. It was you who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. You dried up the ever-flowing rivers. The day is yours, and yours also the night. You established the sun and moon. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. You made both summer and winter. Remember how the enemy has mocked you, O Lord, how foolish people have reviled your name. Do not hand over the life of your dove to wild beasts. Do not forget the lives of your afflicted people forever. Have regard for your covenant, because haunts of violence fill the dark places of the land. Do not let the oppressed retreat in disgrace. May the poor and the needy praise your name. Rise up, O God, and defend your cause. Remember how fools mock you all day long. Do not ignore the clamour of your adversaries, the uproar of your enemies, which rises continually.
I'd like to speak today about a particular type of psalm. When we think of the Psalms, I think we tend to think that they're mainly of praising God. And certainly that might be the conclusion that you can draw. If you look at the songbooks that focus on the Psalms, they always choose the verses of praise for us to sing. However, you might be surprised to learn that at least 30% of the Psalms are what are called Psalms of Lament. Now that word lament may give the wrong impression, because these Psalms of Lament are actually a form of praise. I don't know if that really surprises you. When we think of the word lament, perhaps we think in terms of it, a complaining, linking with things that are going wrong. But it's not the same as complaint. Complaint would be an accusation against God which maligns his character. That complaint is an accusation that maligns God and his character. But lament is an appeal to God based on confidence in his character. Lament is an appeal based to God on confidence in his character. There's quite a difference between the two. Notice that these psalms of lament, like the other psalms, are actually meant to be sung to God. They express really intense emotions, real human struggles, anguish of heart. And you find when you read through them that most of the issues are the same now as they were then. I discovered that Martin Luther, through on, really treasured them. He wrote this, he said, "Where do you find more sorrowful, more pitiful words of sadness than in the Psalms of Lament? There you look into the hearts of the saints, as into death, yes, as into hell itself. When they speak of fear and hope, they use such words that no painter could so depict your fear or hope, and no orator has portrayed them. And that they speak these words to God and with God, this is the best thing of all. This gives the words double earnestness and life." It's Martin Luther. You find that some of the psalms are the cry of an individual, or they're a cry on behalf of a nation or a community. And there's a usual format to the psalm, which goes like this. First of all, the psalm begins by addressing God, and perhaps by doing it in a way like crying out to him. And then comes the complaint, and then that's followed by a request, and then that finishes with an expression of trust. So, for a quick and easy example, if you want to look at Psalm 13, which is on page 548 of the Bibles, Psalm 13, which it says for the director of music, again, it was meant to be sung. It's a psalm of David. And we start by David crying out to God for himself. He begins with a cry of desperation. "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me?" I just say, how relevant is that to today and what's going on? I'm sure Ukrainians are sort of crying out in the same way. But then there comes the request for God to act. "Look on me, and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say I overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fail." So he comes in here and asks God to transform the situation. What a change from those early verses, just crying out in despair. There's an expectation, isn't there, that God will actually act, based on his knowledge of what God is like and how he has helped in the past. And so he can go right on and said, "But," and that's a big but here, "but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me." David began the psalm seemingly in a state of depression, but he comes out of it by remembering all the good things, the blessings that he's received from God, and that gives him confidence in the future. I think it's always a good thing to count our blessings when we start to feel we're down and things are getting on top of us. Count our blessings as well. Well, going back to Psalm 74, which is the one that Dot read, of course it's a much longer psalm, and this time it's a cry on behalf of the nation. But you find that there's still a similar format in it. It was composed when the Israelites were in exile. It's written in the wake of Jerusalem's destruction, including the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians in 586 BC. And we start again with this cry of desperation. Why have you rejected us forever, O God? Why does your anger smoulder against the sheep of your pasture? But then you find that the writer reminds God of everything that has happened in the past. Like David, he cries out, how long? Then he reminds himself of who God is, some of the things that he has done, and particularly of his covenant with the nation. God's name, he says, has been dishonoured. The fact that they don't hear anything from God is absolutely bewildering. But when he recalls the way in which God acted with power, then he can call on God to act again. In times of want, in times of destruction, do we have those same kind of thoughts? Remembering what God has done in the past, trusting God to act in the future. Because like Asaph in this psalm, we as Christians can look with faith to the mighty acts of God and believe that he will triumph over all foes in the end. 1 Peter 1:3 says, in his great mercy he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Isn't that what makes the difference? The fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Despair turned to victory. Someone said this, do not doubt in the dark what you know to be true in the light. I think that's a great saying. Do not doubt in the dark what you know to be true in the light. What do these Psalms of Lament mean for us? I think first of all, it means that we can be honest with God. We can cry out to him in desperation too. We can be angry. We can complain. God doesn't mind. After all, this is the example that we have in his book here. But these Psalms of Lament are an appeal to God based on confidence in his character. When we take our grumbles and our moans to our Father in heaven, it's really a proof of our relationship with him, isn't it? Our great caregiver. It reinforces the bond that we have with him. So it should be part of our prayer as we seek God's kingdom here on earth by praying for the pain within and around us. We can use these psalms as prayers for ourselves. And we find that if they're not actually relevant to our own situation, we can use them to pray for others and for their situation. Because I'm sure that there are people around the world who are in the situations that these psalms say. Perhaps like David, or the other psalmists, we might begin negatively. But hopefully, in the end, we will think more positively, filled with faith. And one thing we can do is actually have a go at writing our own psalm of lament. Perhaps this is what someone could do for the magazine. They have a go at writing their own psalm of lament. Someone did actually do that for the coronavirus epidemic. And so I thought it was quite good. It's someone called the Reverend Kenneth Howcroft. So I thought I'd read this to you. A psalm of lament and praise in a time of coronavirus. And look for those similar elements that are had in the Psalms. How shall we praise you, Lord our God? When we are locked down, how shall we praise you? When the doors to your house are barred and your people cannot assemble. When those desperately in need of money and work cannot even wait in the marketplace. When we have to circle round people in the street and to queue for shops, maintaining safe distance. When we can only communicate by hearing on the phone or seeing on the screen or digitally messaging, or even just waving through a window. When we cannot meet our parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren, or other family members and friends. When we cannot touch them in their flesh and blood to know they're really alive, how shall we praise you? How like Thomas shall we not see yet believe that your Son is raised among us? How shall we praise you? How can I praise you, Lord, Are you plaguing us with this virus to punish us because we have all done wrong, or thought wrongly, or felt wrongly, or just been wrong? If so, why do only some die, and those apparently the ones who are the least worst or most caring among us? Are you trying to teach us a lesson? If so, why is it so hard to learn? And how are we to find the answer when we do not even know the question? But are you still the same loving God, coming to us in our sufferings and opening up the way to new life in Jesus? Though I will try to praise you, through gritted teeth, I will try to praise you. I will try to remember that you have created all things, and this virus is part of your creation. I will try not to hate it, but seek to mitigate its harm. I will try to keep myself and others safe. I will work to pray for them and seek to help in whatever way I can. Lord, when I cannot pray or worship, help me be aware of all your people and your saints and angels hovering around me, lifting me up. When I feel alone, let me feel you near me, even if only for a moment that enables me to go on. Let me hear you say, peace be with you. Lord, I will praise you. Let all the peoples praise you. That was really, really good. Thank you. Perhaps that's given you encouragement to write one of your own. The other thing that I want to share with you just before we finish is a testimony by somebody called Stacey Gledysmith. I've no idea who Stacey Gledysmith is, but they wrote this in relation to worship, and I think it's quite important what they do. He writes this: my quest to understand the Psalms of Lament began in the midst of a deep period of depression. I had spent a wonderfully rich 2 months in Ethiopia recording Christian Somali music for broadcast from Ethiopia over Somalia. During my time there, I received numerous prophetic words that doors would open for me when I returned to Canada. But within a few short months of my return, I was unemployed and living in the basement of a friend's parents' house. My familial home had burned down, and a friend of mine had committed suicide. These were not the doors I wanted opened. I was deeply disillusioned with God, completely buried under my grief, and spent most of my days either in a futile job search or sleeping. During this time, I was still leading worship at church, and my depression inevitably deepened on the weeks I was to lead worship. At the time, I was unable to pinpoint the reason for this, but when I finally began to come out of my depression, I realised that I felt I could not worship God on Sunday mornings, not as I was. Although many individuals and families in the church supported me in critical ways during this time, I felt wholly excluded when the church gathered for worship. In the midst of my depression, I did not feel I could bring my whole self into a context in which only praise seemed acceptable. Eventually, as I grew well enough to talk these thoughts over with my pastor and others in the congregation, I began to realise that perhaps the difficulty was not so much with me, but with the way I was leading worship. If one of the purposes of the gathered worship of the church is to unify, surely there had to be something wrong with worship services that created feelings of separation from God and God's people. This conviction grew stronger as I talked with others who had been feeling the same way. During my depression, the only scripture passages I had felt able to read were the Psalms, and specifically the Psalms of Lament. It seemed right then to begin to include in the gathered worship of the church the scriptures that had made me feel included in God's story, even in the midst of my depression. I was amazed by the response I received. I began to hear from others who felt they had to leave a part of themselves at the door if they were going to be able to worship God. Not only did these individuals now feel included in the worship of the church, they also discovered a new capacity for praise. The book of Psalms exists today because the people of Israel used these songs, including the songs of lament, in their worship. And they sang them often enough that the Psalms were remembered and recorded for future generations. The Songbook of Israel contains more psalms of lament than any other type of psalm. There are so many psalms of lament that can be broken into subcategories: individual lament, corporate lament, psalms of confession, illness, political complaint, and the like. Today, however, the psalms of lament are used infrequently by the church. When we do use them in worship, all too often we skip over the complaint, reading or singing only the expression of trust and praise with which so many of the lament psalms conclude. It seems strange that the church today would have found lament so difficult when it was such an integral expression of worship for Israel. But perhaps we do not use lament because we do not understand it. We make lament synonymous with grieving and therefore fail to understand its significance and its use. It is very hard to lament as an expression of trust in the character, power, and previous action of God, an expression of trust that looks beyond our current circumstances to what will be and what is, the reality behind the reality. And I thought that was a very interesting comment, especially a lot of the way worship does go on in a lot of churches. That's something that we ourselves need to take into account. So I'll leave that with you to think about. Psalms of Lament.